All right, trauma and stressor-related disorders. We mentioned DSM-4 versus DSM-5. The anxiety chapter from DSM-4 was broken into 3 sections. One remained anxiety, one became obsessive-compulsive and those related disorders, and then one became difficulties related to trauma and stress. So that is what we're going to talk about today. Specific examples of stress. We all have them and we all have different ones, but I'm sure procrastination, family issues, work pressures, all of that, creates stress and many more. It's important to note actual versus real perceptions of stress. So the actual amount of stress that's happening versus how do you perceive it? How much do you perceive that you can handle it? That you can deal with that sort of stress, or is it just too much to bear, or is it plenty, addressable? Types of stress: daily hassles like bills and just day-to-day issues with carpooling and things like that. Conflict with others, pressures from parents or other loved ones. Social cultural stressors to fit in. On page 138, there's a questionnaire about change. That's another stressor. Registering for classes, for example, is a low-level stress. Missing sleep, death of a loved one, getting caught cheating. It's change has a broad range. There are other kinds of stressors. There are adaptive and maladaptive ways of coping. Page 142 in your book talks about emotion versus problem focused. So in emotion focused, you can flip to that. You can look through that. People take measures that immediately reduce the impact of stressors, then deny its existence or withdraw from the situation. Versus problem focused, where they examine the stressors they face and do what they need to, and do what they can to change them or modify them, or their own reactions. And then optimism addresses coping. It makes it more likely that you're going to be able to cope the more optimistic you are. There is a questionnaire on optimism on page 145. And then the answers are on page 146. So you might just see how optimistic you are. One of the broader diagnoses in the DSM is the adjustment disorder, a maladaptive reaction to some event or a stressor that within 3 months of onset of that stressor. So grades, moving, somebody dying, a breakup, all of these are can cause maladaptive reactions. They're all events that can cause stress. These stressors can cause impairment in your daily living, your daily activities, so that you can't necessarily think as well as you did, because you're too hung up on the person you loved, so you can't get your work done, something like that. If it continues, then the diagnosis might develop into depression or some other or post-traumatic stress disorder. But if it's just something that you're going to work through over a few days or a few weeks, that's where an adjustment disorder would be a perfect diagnosis. Traumatic stress disorders, the ones listed in your book: acute stress disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. On page 148, really it's the amount of time. The acute stress disorder is acute maladaptive reaction in the days or weeks following a traumatic event, whereas post-traumatic is much more prolonged. So we hear a lot about post-traumatic stress disorder in the news because people coming back from military excursions, people being raped, people being caught in tsunamis. All of these are major events that change your life, that cause you to feel like something's going to re-happen to you, or that it's just more than you can control or bear, and it causes a traumatic reaction. Acute stress is the same idea, just in a more time-limited frame. The bottom of page 48, you have examples of features of traumatic stress. So if, for example, when I work with people who have come back from military situations, they have often heard heavy gunfire. And so then when it is the 4th of July, if they hear a car backfire or fireworks popping overhead, that reminds them of bombs and guns popping all around them, and that causes them extreme stress. It cues their behaviors, and they feel very, very negatively and like they've got to get out of there because they're unsafe. And then that leads to re-experiencing the trauma. That can trigger visions and experiences that you don't want to experience. Emotional distress, negative thoughts like the world is not a safe place. I'm never safe. I have to check my doors all the time because I don't believe that they're really locked and somebody's going to come in and get me. Heightened arousal, like jumping, the phrase jumping out of your skin because something just a loud sound got you really stressed. And then emotional numbing, where it's just hard for you to feel anything because you feel so disconnected. On page 154, it talks about EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a semi-controversial treatment for PTSD and stressor-related topics.